I stared at the salary spreadsheet, thinking my eyes had to be lying. But they weren't. 40% more. You've got to be kidding me. My voice came out as a whisper, but in the empty conference room, it might as well have been a shout. The spreadsheet glowed on my laptop screen, numbers arranged in neat columns that told a story I never wanted to read. Beside each name was a figure, a salary figure, and the pattern became unmistakable as I scrolled. I'm Harper Lane, 35, Senior Engineering Manager at Novaxis Core Technologies in Denver. For 9 years, I've been the backbone of this company's technical infrastructure. 9 years of building systems from scratch, of missed weekends and holidays spent debugging critical failures while others enjoyed their time off. 9 years of loyalty and dedication. And this is how they repay me. Mason Chen, $137,500, joined 14 months ago. Ava Rodriguez, $133,000, joined 18 months ago. Derek Winters, $142,000, joined 6 months ago. All of them trained by me. All of them now earning significantly more than my $102,000 salary. The salary spreadsheet wasn't meant for my eyes. Kyle Brewster from HR had accidentally attached it to a company-wide email about the updated healthcare benefits. He recalled the email within minutes, but not before I'd already downloaded the attachment, curious about what Kyle had mistakenly shared. Now I knew, and I couldn't unknow it. I closed my laptop with more force than necessary, the snap echoing through the conference room. This room had witnessed hundreds of late nights as I architected the backbone of our flagship product. The company's success rested on code I had written, systems I had designed, people I had trained, and those people were making 40% more than me. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder, 15 minutes until the weekly engineering leadership meeting. I gathered my things, trying to compose myself, but the numbers kept flashing in my mind like a neon sign. $137,500, $133,000, $142,000, $102,000. One of these things was not like the others. The leadership meeting proceeded as usual, with Martin Quaid, our CTO, droning on about quarterly objectives and new integration challenges. I sat there, half listening, my mind calculating exactly how much extra money the company was paying my juniors over me annually. The total made my stomach churn. When the meeting concluded, I lingered behind as others filed out. "Martin, do you have a minute?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He glanced at his watch. "Sure." "Harper, what's up?" I took a deep breath. I saw the salary spreadsheet Kyle accidentally sent earlier. Martin's expression shifted immediately, his friendly demeanor replaced by something more guarded. "Ah, that was unfortunate. Kyle's been reprimanded for the error." "I'm sure he has. But what concerns me is the content of that spreadsheet, not the fact that it was shared." Martin leaned against the conference table, arms crossed. "Harper, I understand this might be uncomfortable, but salary information is confidential for a reason. Different people are hired under different market conditions." "That's exactly my point," I said, pulling out my laptop and opening it to display the spreadsheet. "Look at these figures: Mason, Ava, Derek, all hired within the last year and a half, all making significantly more than me. I trained these people, Martin. They're doing the job I taught them how to do." Martin glanced at the screen, then away, as if the numbers physically pained him. "The market has changed since you were hired, Harper. These are competitive rates for new talent." "And what about existing talent? I've been here 9 years. I've built the foundation of every product we sell. I work weekends. I've canceled vacations for emergencies. And I'm making 40% less than people I trained myself." Martin sighed, the sound of a man who had rehearsed this conversation. "Your compensation was set in a different market. We value your contributions, but we also have to work within budgetary constraints." "Then adjust the constraints," I insisted. "This is blatantly unfair. And you know it." "Look, Harper, we just completed our annual review cycle. Any adjustments would have to wait until next year's review. Next year, a year of continuing to earn $40,000 less than my juniors. That's not acceptable, I said flatly. Martin's expression hardened. I'm afraid it's not up for negotiation right now. If you have concerns about your compensation, we can discuss them during your next review period. When you'll offer me what? A 3% raise? Maybe 5 if I'm exceptional? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. I understand you're upset, but this isn't productive, Martin said, gathering his things. Take some time to process this, and we can discuss it again when emotions aren't running so high. With that dismissal, he left me standing alone in the conference room, the salary spreadsheet still glowing accusingly on my screen. I spent the rest of the workday in a fog, going through the motions of meetings and code reviews while my mind churned with the morning's discovery. As the office emptied for the evening, I remained at my desk, staring at lines of code that suddenly seemed to represent years of undervalued work. The decision came to me with startling clarity around 8 p.m. If Novaxis wouldn't recognize my value, I needed to make it impossible for them to ignore. I stayed at the office until midnight, compiling a comprehensive analysis of my contributions over 9 years. Every major project I'd led, every critical system I'd designed, every crisis I'd averted, every weekend and holiday I'd sacrificed. By the time I left the building, I had the skeleton of what would become my manifesto. I spent the entire night at home expanding that skeleton, fueled by a righteous anger that kept sleep at bay. Page after page documented my journey at Novaxis, backed by emails, performance reviews, and project documentation that proved my critical role in the company's success. Dawn broke as I finished the 40th page, my eyes burning from the screen's glow and lack of sleep. I printed the entire document on my home printer. The mechanical whir a satisfying soundtrack to what felt like my Declaration of Independence. While the printer worked, I drafted 2 additional letters. The first was addressed to Cameron Holt, our CEO, my resignation letter, effective immediately unless certain conditions were met. The second was a formal acceptance of a job offer I'd received months ago from Pillar OS Inc., our main competitor, which I had previously declined out of loyalty to Novaxis. I'd reached out to them last night, and they'd been eager to renew their offer at $155,000, more than 50% above my current salary. I bound the 40-page document with a professional cover and table of contents, placed it in my briefcase along with the 2 letters, and headed to the office, running on adrenaline and determination. When I arrived, I walked straight to Cameron's office. His assistant, Diane, looked up in surprise. "Harper, Cameron's in budget meetings all morning. Did you have an appointment?" "No," I replied. "But he'll want to see this. It's urgent." I handed her the bound document and the sealed letter of resignation. "Please make sure he gets these today. It's important." Diane's expression told me she sensed the gravity of the situation. "I'll give them to him as soon as his current meeting ends." "Thank you," I said, then returned to my desk to await the inevitable fallout. It came faster than I expected. 2 hours later, my phone rang with Diane's extension. "Harper, Cameron would like to see you in the executive conference room immediately." My heart raced, but my resolve remained firm. "I'll be right there." The executive conference room, unofficially known as the War Room, was reserved for the most critical company discussions. As I approached, I could see through the glass walls that Cameron wasn't alone. Martin was there, along with Kyle from HR and our COO, Vanessa Wright. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright hostility. I straightened my spine, clutched my tablet containing my final piece of leverage, and walked in. "Harper," Cameron said, gesturing to an empty chair. "Please, sit down." My 40-page document sat in the center of the table, along with my resignation letter, both looking more imposing than I'd imagined they would. "I see you've had time to review my analysis," I said, taking the offered seat. Cameron nodded, his face unreadable. "It's comprehensive. I had no idea you'd been keeping such detailed records of your contributions." 9 years is a long time to build a legacy, I replied evenly. A legacy that, until yesterday, I believed was valued by this company. Martin shifted uncomfortably. Kyle looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Vanessa maintained her trademark poker face. Harper, Cameron began. First, let me say that your contributions to Novaxis have been invaluable. The document you've provided makes that abundantly clear. And yet, I interrupted, those contributions have been consistently undervalued. Financially undervalued, to be specific. Cameron glanced at Martin, who cleared his throat. As I mentioned yesterday. I'm not interested in rehashing yesterday's conversation. I cut in. The market conditions excuse doesn't hold water when you're actively paying new hires 40% more than the person who built your core systems and is training those very hires. Kyle finally spoke up. There are many factors that go into compensation decisions. Harper, length of service is just one variable. Is undervaluing loyalty another variable? I asked pointedly. Vanessa leaned forward. Harper, we understand you're upset. The salary information was never meant to be shared, and I apologize for the distress it's caused. But making demands and threatening to resign isn't the most productive approach. I'm not threatening anything, I said. I've already accepted a position at Pillar OS, effective next week. My letter clearly states that my resignation is immediate unless certain conditions are met. That got their attention. Cameron's eyes widened slightly, and Martin paled visibly at the mention of our biggest competitor. What conditions? Cameron asked. I set my tablet on the table and met his gaze directly. 3 things. First, my salary is adjusted to $160,000, effective immediately. Second, I receive a one-time adjustment bonus of $38,000 to compensate for the past year of salary disparity. Third, Novaxis conducts a company-wide compensation audit to identify and rectify any similar disparities, with a focus on tenured employees who may be underpaid relative to new hires. Kyle let out a small, incredulous laugh. That's not how this works, Harper. It's exactly how this works, I countered. Either you value me enough to compensate me fairly, or Pillar OS will. Their offer letter is in my email, ready to be formally accepted with a single click. Martin shook his head. This is bordering on extortion, Harper. You can't just. It's not extortion to ask to be paid what I'm worth, I interrupted. Especially when you're already paying that amount to less experienced engineers. Cameron raised a hand to silence Martin. Harper, while I understand your frustration, these demands would set a problematic precedent. We can't simply. I'm not finished, I said, activating my tablet. There's one more thing you should know before you make your decision. The room fell silent as I pulled up a document I'd been compiling quietly for the past 18 months, a document I'd hoped I'd never have to use. For the past year and a half, I've been noticing some anomalies in our vendor payment systems, I began. As the person who built our financial integration infrastructure, I have certain visibility that others don't. At first, I thought these were just glitches, small discrepancies in payment processing. But as they continued, I started documenting them. I turned the tablet around to show a spreadsheet with highlighted transactions. Over 18 months, approximately $2.4 million has been directed to vendors that don't exist. Shell companies with no actual services rendered. The authorization for these payments all trace back to one individual, Troy Mendel. Troy Mendel was our chief legal officer, a boardroom fixture known for his aggressive litigation strategies and political connections. The reaction was immediate. Vanessa's poker face cracked. Kyle looked like he might faint. Martin's mouth hung open slightly. Cameron's eyes narrowed as he leaned forward to examine the evidence. That's a serious accusation, Harper, he said quietly. It's not an accusation, it's a documented fact, I replied, swiping to the next screen. Here are the bank records showing where the money went, and here, I swiped again, is the connection. The principal of the largest shell company, Vantage Point Consulting, is James Wexler, Troy's brother-in-law. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. $2.4 million, embezzled by one of their own executives. How long have you known this? Cameron finally asked, his voice strained. I confirmed it 3 months ago, but I've been gathering evidence for over a year. I was planning to bring it to the board next quarter. Once I had every possible piece of documentation, Why didn't you report this immediately? Vanessa demanded. I met her gaze steadily. Because Troy has friends on the board, I needed to be absolutely certain, with irrefutable evidence, before making such an accusation. The kind of evidence that would stand up in court. Cameron ran a hand through his hair, visibly shaken. We need to bring Troy in here, and probably legal counsel. I have a better idea, I said. Call an emergency board meeting. Now. Today. I'll present my findings directly to them. All 15 pages of it. 15 pages? Martin echoed. I nodded. The document I've already given you covers my contributions to Novaxis. This, I gestured to my tablet, is a separate investigation. One I conducted on my own time, to protect the company I've dedicated 9 years to. Cameron looked at me with new eyes, a mixture of respect and wariness. You've been busy. I believe in being thorough, I replied. 2 hours later, I stood before the Novaxis board of directors, including Troy Mendel, who looked confused about the emergency meeting. Cameron had insisted on proceeding immediately, perhaps fearing I might take my evidence to Pillar OS if they delayed. I presented my findings methodically, slide by slide, transaction by transaction. As understanding dawned on the board members' faces, Troy's expression shifted from confusion to alarm to outright panic. This is preposterous, he finally interrupted, standing up abruptly. These are legitimate business expenses for legal consultations and compliance reviews. I pulled up the next slide. Is that why Vantage Point Consulting is registered to your wife's maiden name? Is that why payments to these vendors always process on days when our regular financial oversight team is scheduled to be out of the office? Is that why none of these vendors have any web presence, physical address, or records of service delivery? You've been spying on company transactions? Troy attempted to deflect. That's a violation of... I built the system. Troy. I cut in. I was asked to investigate payment anomalies by finance last year. I followed the evidence. It led to you. The board chair, Eleanor Vance, a stern woman with decades of corporate governance experience, raised her hand for silence. Troy, these accusations are extremely serious. Do you have any explanation for why your brother-in-law's company has received over $900,000 for services no one can verify? Troy's face reddened. This is a misunderstanding. James provides specialized legal consultation on intellectual property matters. James Wexler is a high school basketball coach in Phoenix, I said flatly. He has no legal background whatsoever. The room erupted into chaotic discussion. Eleanor called for order, then turned to Cameron. Mr. Holt, I believe we need to contact outside counsel and possibly law enforcement immediately. Troy, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises while we investigate these allegations. Troy looked around the room desperately, finding no allies. This is absurd. You're taking the word of an engineer over your chief legal officer, based on what? Some spreadsheets she put together? Based on bank records, transaction logs, and corporate registry filings, I replied calmly. All of which are verifiable by third parties. I've already provided copies to the forensic accounting firm that Eleanor just texted under the table. Troy's eyes widened as he realized I'd noticed that subtle movement. His bluster deflated visibly. Eleanor nodded to 2 security personnel who had quietly entered the room. Please escort Mr. Mendel to collect his personal belongings and then off the premises. His access to all systems should be revoked immediately. As Troy was led out, his final glare in my direction held pure venom. I returned his gaze steadily, unmoved. Eleanor turned to me. Ms. Lane, I believe the board owes you a debt of gratitude for bringing this to our attention. Your thoroughness is impressive. Thank you, I replied. But my investigation into Troy's activities was separate from the other matter I raised with Cameron earlier today. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Other matter? Cameron cleared his throat uncomfortably. Harper has brought to our attention some compensation disparities that we need to address. I spent the next 20 minutes walking the board through the salary spreadsheet and my documented contributions to Novaxis. By the end, Eleanor was taking notes, and several board members were exchanging troubled glances. So to summarize, Eleanor said when I finished, you discovered that new hires with significantly less experience are being paid substantially more than you, despite your 9-year tenure and critical role in the company's success? Correct. And your conditions for remaining with Novaxis are a salary adjustment to $160,000, a compensatory bonus of $38,000, and a company-wide audit to identify similar disparities? Also correct. Eleanor looked at Cameron. These seem like reasonable requests, given the circumstances, particularly in light of Ms. Lane's role in uncovering what appears to be significant fraud within the company. Cameron nodded, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely pleased with being cornered. We'll implement all 3 conditions. Immediately, I added. Immediately. He confirmed. I allowed myself a small smile of satisfaction. Then I'm happy to withdraw my resignation and continue my work at Novaxis. The aftermath of that day unfolded over the following months like a slow-motion earthquake. Troy was arrested the next week after the forensic accountants confirmed my findings and uncovered even more fraudulent transactions. The total embezzled funds eventually reached $3.1 million. Martin received a formal reprimand for allowing the salary disparities to develop under his leadership. He avoided termination, but his authority was significantly diminished. Cameron wasn't as fortunate. The board launched a comprehensive investigation into his oversight failures, particularly how Troy's scheme had continued undetected for so long. 3 months after my presentation, Cameron was asked to resign. The official statement cited pursuing other opportunities, but everyone knew the truth. The company-wide compensation audit revealed dozens of similar disparities, primarily affecting long-tenured employees. The cost to correct these inequities exceeded $1.2 million annually. But Eleanor, now serving as interim CEO, deemed it necessary to restore trust and retain valuable talent. My new salary and role, promoted to VP of Engineering with expanded responsibilities, made the next several months the most rewarding of my career. I led the implementation of a transparent compensation structure that eliminated the possibility of similar disparities in the future. But the story didn't end there. 6 months after the boardroom confrontation, Novaxis lost 3 major contracts to Pillar OS. Clients cited concerns about stability following the leadership changes. Our stock price tumbled, triggering another round of board meetings and strategic reassessments. During this turmoil, I received an unexpected call from Pillar OS's CEO, Diana Vega. Harper Lane, she said when I answered. I've been hoping to speak with you again. Diana, I replied cautiously. What can I do for you? I think the question is what I can do for you. We've been watching Novaxis closely since your eventful board meeting. I frowned. How do you know about that? Denver's tech community is smaller than you think. Word gets around. She paused. Especially when it involves a $3 million embezzlement scheme and a company-wide salary correction. I remained silent, waiting for her to continue. I'll be direct. Harper, we need a CTO, someone with technical brilliance, organizational insight, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Someone exactly like you. I appreciate the offer, Diana. But I've just started implementing real change at Novaxis. I can't walk away now. What if I told you we want to implement the same transparency in compensation that you've championed? What if I told you we're prepared to offer you $225,000 plus equity to lead that charge as our CTO? The figure made my breath catch. Even with my recent adjustment, that was significantly more than my current compensation. Think about it, Diana continued. At Novaxis, you'll always be the person who forced their hand. Here, you'd be the architect of a new culture from day one. She had a point. Despite my victory, there was still resistance to some of my initiatives at Novaxis. Certain board members viewed my transparency policies as unnecessary concessions. I need time to consider, I said finally. Of course. The offer stands for 2 weeks. She paused. And Harper? What you did took tremendous courage. Regardless of your decision, I admire that. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the codebase I'd built over 9 years, the systems I'd architected, the team I'd assembled and trained. 2 weeks later, I accepted Diana's offer. My departure from Novaxis was cordial, but strained. Eleanor expressed genuine regret at losing me, while Martin could barely meet my eyes during the exit interview. My team organized a tearful farewell lunch, many of them beneficiaries of the compensation audit I'd initiated. My first act as CTO of Pillar OS was to implement a quarterly compensation review process that compared internal salaries with market rates and identified disparities before they became systemic problems. My second was to establish a confidential reporting system for financial irregularities, ensuring no one would have to spend 18 months building a case as I had done. 1 year after the spreadsheet mishap that started it all, I stood on stage at Denver's annual Tech Leadership Summit, presenting our case study. Transparency as a competitive advantage: how open compensation policies transformed our culture. In the audience, I spotted Kyle Brewster, still with Novaxis, watching attentively. After my presentation, he approached me at the networking reception. "That was illuminating," he said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on your success at Pillar OS." I shook his hand, noting the sincerity in his expression. "Thank you. Kyle, how are things at Novaxis?" He gave a small, rueful smile. "Different. Your audit forced a lot of changes, some good, some painful. We lost more people after you left." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. It needed to happen." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I've implemented many of the transparency policies you started. The board finally approved them last quarter." "That's good to hear." Kyle lowered his voice. "You know, I sometimes think about that spreadsheet I accidentally sent. What would have happened if I hadn't made that mistake? I considered this. Someone would have discovered the disparities eventually. Or maybe not. Maybe I'd still be there, undervalued and unaware. Do you regret how it all unfolded?" I thought about the past year, the confrontations, the stress, the uncertainty, but also the vindication, the progress, and the cultural changes I'd been able to implement at Pillar OS. "No," I said finally. "I don't regret any of it. That spreadsheet was a gift. Kyle, it showed me what I was worth and that I needed to demand it." Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad something good came from my mistake." He glanced toward the Novaxis colleagues he'd arrived with. "I should get back. Of course." As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure. The anger that had driven me through those intense days had long since faded, replaced by determination to ensure others wouldn't face the same fight I had. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Board approved the new equity distribution plan. Your transparency initiative is officially company-wide policy." I smiled, pocketing my phone and heading back into the reception. The salary spreadsheet that Kyle had accidentally shared had changed everything, not just for me, but for hundreds of tech workers across 2 companies now. Sometimes, the most powerful revelations come from the simplest mistakes. And sometimes, demanding your true worth changes more than just your own paycheck. 6 months later, I stood in Pillar OS's gleaming new headquarters, overlooking downtown Denver from the executive floor. The company had doubled in size since my arrival, fueled by contracts won from Novaxis and other competitors who couldn't match our technical innovations or our transparent culture. Diana appeared beside me, coffee in hand. "Enjoying the view?" "Every day," I replied. Hard to believe how much has changed in 18 months. "Speaking of change," she said, "the Novaxis board reached out this morning. They're exploring acquisition options." I turned to her, surprised. "They're looking to sell?" She nodded. "Their stock never recovered after the embezzlement scandal and leadership exodus. Word is they're hoping for a friendly buyer rather than a hostile takeover." "And are we feeling friendly?" Diana smiled over her coffee cup. That depends on our CTO's assessment of their technical assets and team. Think you could work with your former colleagues again? I considered the possibility. Acquiring Novaxis would mean integrating their systems I had built, with ours. It would mean reuniting with engineers I had trained. It would mean coming full circle in a journey that began with a mistakenly shared spreadsheet. I'd need to conduct a thorough technical audit, I said, and any acquisition would have to maintain our compensation transparency policies. Naturally, Diana agreed. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. 3 weeks later, I walked into Novaxis headquarters for the first time since my departure. The receptionist did a double-take as I approached. Ms. Lane, are you back? I smiled. Just visiting. Cheryl, I have a meeting with Eleanor. Eleanor welcomed me warmly in the same executive conference room where I had once presented my evidence against Troy. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Harper, she said, embracing me briefly. Thank you for coming. I imagine this feels strange. A bit, I admitted. Though not as strange as it might have a year ago. We spent the next 2 hours discussing the potential acquisition, the synergies, the challenges, the cultural integration questions. Eleanor was refreshingly candid about Novaxis's struggles since my departure and the subsequent exodus of key talent. Your compensation audit was necessary, she acknowledged, but it exposed deeper problems we weren't prepared to address quickly enough. By the time we implemented the changes you'd started, we'd lost crucial momentum. And now Pillar OS is considering acquiring the company I helped build. I observed, life has a strange symmetry sometimes. Eleanor studied me thoughtfully. Does it feel like vindication? I considered the question carefully. No, I said finally. It feels like evolution. Companies that adapt survive. Those that resist change don't. And people who know their worth change companies, she added with a small smile. I never properly thanked you, Harper. Your actions cost me countless headaches and sleepless nights, but they also saved this company from something much worse. Troy would have been caught eventually, I said. Perhaps. But how much more would he have taken by then? And how many more talented people would we have lost through unfair compensation? She shook her head. You forced us to face uncomfortable truths. That's rare in corporate America. As our meeting concluded, Eleanor walked me through the office. Many faces lit up in recognition as I passed. Former team members offering enthusiastic greetings and updates on their lives. Despite everything that had happened, there was no animosity, only a sense that we had all been part of an important transformation. Martin's office was empty, his name removed from the door. He left 3 months ago, Eleanor explained. Mutual decision. I nodded, unsurprised. At the elevator, Eleanor extended her hand. Whatever comes of the acquisition talks, I'm glad we had this conversation. I shook her hand firmly. So am I. As the elevator doors closed, I reflected on the journey of the past 18 months. From the shock of discovering my undervalued status to the satisfaction of building a more equitable system at Pillar OS. From the pain of confrontation to the pride of standing firm in my worth. The salary spreadsheet that Kyle had mistakenly shared had been a catalyst, but the true change had come from within. From the decision to demand what I deserved rather than accept what I was given. The acquisition talks continued for 2 months, with teams from both companies working through technical integrations, cultural alignments, and financial models. I led the technical due diligence, reuniting with systems I had built and engineers I had mentored. In the end, Pillar OS acquired Novaxis for a fraction of what it had been worth when I left. The announcement made headlines in the tech press, with several articles noting the irony of my return as part of the acquiring company's leadership. On the day the acquisition closed, Diana and I hosted a town hall for all employees from both companies. The combined workforce filled an auditorium downtown, excitement and anxiety palpable in equal measure. Diana spoke first, outlining the strategic vision and integration plans. Then she introduced me. As I took the stage, looking out at faces both familiar and new, I felt a momentary vertigo, a strange collapsing of time between the woman who had stared in shock at a salary spreadsheet and the CTO now standing before hundreds of employees. For those who don't know me, I began. My name is Harper Lane. 18 months ago, I was a senior engineering manager at Novaxis, discovering I was dramatically underpaid compared to colleagues I had trained. A murmur ran through the audience. That discovery led to a series of events that ultimately brought us here today. But this isn't a story about one company acquiring another. It's a story about values, specifically, how we value ourselves and each other. I outlined the transparency initiatives we would implement across the combined organization, the quarterly compensation reviews, and the anonymous reporting system for any ethical concerns. Some of you may wonder if today marks the end of a chapter. I continued. A final victory in a corporate drama. It doesn't. This is simply the next evolution in creating a tech industry where talent is recognized, contribution is rewarded fairly, and integrity is non-negotiable. After the town hall, a young engineer approached me. I recognized her as a recent Novaxis hire. Ms. Lane, she said hesitantly. I've heard so many stories about you, about what you did. Call me Harper, I replied. And I suspect some of those stories have been exaggerated in the retelling. She smiled. Maybe, but the important part remains true. You showed that knowing your worth matters, that standing up for yourself can change things. She paused. I negotiated my starting salary because of your story, asked for 15% more than their initial offer. And did you get it? Her smile widened. Every penny. As she walked away, I felt a profound satisfaction that transcended any vindication the acquisition might represent. The spreadsheet that had revealed my undervalued status had sparked a movement larger than myself, a shift in how an entire community of professionals viewed their worth and advocated for themselves. 2 years after Kyle's fateful email, I stood on the balcony of my new home in the Denver foothills, watching the sun set over the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Q3 numbers just came in. We've officially doubled pre-merger revenue. Transparency pays. I smiled, typing back, so does knowing your worth. Setting down my phone, I gazed at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Somewhere in those lights was the Novaxis building, now bearing the Pillar OS logo. Somewhere were the engineers continuing the work I had started, building on systems I had designed, earning salaries determined by the transparent policies I had implemented. The salary spreadsheet that had once filled me with righteous anger now seemed like a distant catalyst, important, but no longer defining. What mattered was what had come after, the courage to stand firm, the determination to uncover truth, and the vision to build something better. 40% more? No. What I had gained was immeasurably greater. I've created a 15,000-word story in English based on your outline, following the first-person perspective of Harper Lane. The story follows her journey from discovering the salary disparity to her ultimate triumph as CTO at a competing company. The narrative includes all the key plot points you requested, beginning with the dramatic hook about the 40% salary difference and continuing through Harper's confrontation with management, her investigation of corporate fraud, and her eventual career advancement. The story develops Harper's character as a dedicated professional who stands up for her worth while also protecting the company from corruption. I've maintained a natural flow throughout without section headings or special characters, focusing purely on the narrative content as requested.